Next one.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Prof. Broadbent, Executive Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Prof. Lombard, Dr. Isabelle Parsons, who is our respondent this evening, and she's an Associate Lecturer at the Open University and also a Research Associate at UNISA. Welcome to you. Senior leaders of the University, members of Senate and other academics, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, Sani Bunani, goeienaand, good evening, Tobela. My name is Kinta Burger, I'm the registrar, and I'm standing in for our Vice Chancellor, Professor Marwala, who unfortunately can't be here, but he sent all his greetings and congratulations as well. It is indeed a great honor and special privilege for me to welcome you to this inaugural lecture of Professor Marlize Lombard. As I do so, I wish to express a warm welcome to her loved ones, special guests, her colleagues. This is indeed a proud, joyful and landmark moment for all of you, for you, Professor, and of course for all of us here at UJ. The inauguration of professors is a public ceremony in which newly appointed professors are inducted into office and deliver their inaugural addresses. I know that it's not so recently appointed for you, 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. The ceremony has its roots in the medieval university and serves multiple purposes. Firstly, it is an expression of welcome and an entry for new professors joining the circle of colleagues who are already professors. Secondly, it provides a platform for the professors to display their expertise in the discipline and showcase their research. It is a celebration of the contributions to the discipline and ultimately the impact on society. Professors provide a university with its identity, its character and academic integrity. Today we gather to witness the entry of Professor Lombard to this illustrious community of scholars at the University of Johannesburg. This evening we will listen to Professor Lombard as one further step in the journey of being a professor. This is a journey which does not culminate once this lecture has been given. It is a self-reflective pause in the journey of the professor, with a promise of more to enrich our minds and simultaneously contributing to the rich intellectual body of work in the discipline. Professor Lombard, we are looking forward to your address. I'm now calling on the Executive Dean, Professor Broadbent, to introduce Professor Lombard to you. I thank you, Riali Boga, Siyabonga, baie dankie.
Thank you very much. May I add my welcome? Professor Lombard, as the registrar pointed out, has actually been a professor a little longer than this inaugural would suggest. Almost, indeed, since prehistoric times, I'm tempted to point out. I wanted to just share one anecdote about Professor Lombard from my early days as a Vice Dean Research when I was very enthusiastic and energetic, and had been warned about people trying to get money out of the deanery, out of their research funds. And this Lombard character had put in a request for a huge suite of rooms in Sweden. And I was, well, what do you want a suite of rooms in Sweden for? I mean, kind of I don't know, I had saunas in my mind. And then I headed out, and I can't remember whether I actually approved it or not, but I was deeply suspicious. I subsequently realized it was, what she said was, I need this for all my collaborators. And I was like, seriously, how many collaborators can you have? And it turns out it's all true. She does have lots of collaborators. And I was completely wrong. So apologies for that. And since then, our relationship has improved, and she's been really instrumental in taking the paleo sciences, the paleo research operation off the ground in the university as a whole. We've recently agreed to establish an institute, and she's been instrumental in that. My job is to read the CV. Marlize Lombard is currently appointed as Director of the Centre for Anthropological Research, which serves as the hub for human origins research at the University of Johannesburg. As a professor in Stone Age archaeology, she also leads the interdisciplinary Paleotrax research program with more than a dozen local and international collaborators and several postgraduate students. The long-term aim of this program is to produce an integrated, detailed, and holistic understanding of the evolution of our species, Homo sapiens, in southern Africa. The work conducted under her leadership contributes to current theoretical debate and or applies cutting-edge techniques to explore empirically A, the Stone Age Paleolithic occupational history of southern Africa, B, behavioral and cognitive evolutionary trends during the Stone Age, and C, indigenous knowledge systems associated with the Stone Ages of southern Africa. Her strategy is to balance blue skies curiosity-driven research with steady empirical work and publication of results. This careful balancing of secure versus risky research allows for a continual flow of dissemination and productive postgraduate and young research projects and publication, as well as for the stimulation and excitement that comes with applying new ideas and or techniques to the archaeological and or paleoanthropological records with potentially unexpected outcomes. She received her MSc cum laude in 2004 and PhD in 2007 degrees in archaeology from the science faculty of the University of Witwatersrand. Here she was also one of the initial members of the then Institute for Human Evolution from 2008 to 2010, after which she joined the Department of Anthropology and Development Studies at UJ. Prior to 2008, she was Assistant Director and Head of Archaeology and Anthropology at the KwaZulu-Natal Museum. Before that, she taught archaeology at UNISA for 2 years. She is a standing member of the peer review group of the Scientific Executive Committee of the Leakey Foundation, has served as editor of the South African Archaeological Bulletin, which is amongst the top 15% of archaeological journals worldwide. She currently serves on the editorial boards of Southern African Humanities, Australian Archaeology, and Springer Briefs in Archaeology book series. Since obtaining her honours degree at WITS in 2002, she has published 75 peer-reviewed articles and chapters and co-edited 1 volume. Not only is she a prolific researcher and author, but her work is also impactful, demonstrated by her H-index of 30 at Google Scholar and 24 at Scopus. She served as a founding member of the Council for the Association of Southern African Professional Archaeologists between 2004 and 2008, and is currently a member of that association, as well as of the International Union of the Protohistoric and Prehistorical Sciences, the European Association of Archaeology, the Association of Archaeological Wear and Residue Analysts, and the Society of Africanist Archaeologists. Since 2003, Marlize was able to raise more than 10 million rands in external research grants, currying her great favour with her dean, most of which was used to establish the Microtrax laboratory at UJ and to fund postdoctoral research fellows, doctoral candidates, as well as masters and honours students, and their participation in local and international conferences. Some of these are now successful young researchers in their own right. In 2012, she received an award from Elsevier as an author of the top 10 most cited articles in the Journal of Archaeological Science for the years 2007 to 2011. From 2015 to 17, she was an invited fellow in residence at the prestigious Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Studies. Here, she collaborated as the only woman in a team under the leadership of Peter Gardenfors, Distinguished Professor of Philosophy and Cognitive Science at the University of Lund in Sweden, conducting research on the evolution of teaching and learning. Starting in November this year, she will lead her own 3-year project at STIAS, together with Professors Anders Hochberg from Linnaeus University in Sweden, entitled Archaeology of a Hungry Mind. Here at UJ, her contributions have not gone unnoticed. In 2010, she was on the Vice-Chancellor's Honours List for Research Excellence. In 2015, was nominated by the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities for the Vice-Chancellor's Distinguished Award in Global Excellence and Stature. The year before that, she was nominated for the Best First-Year Lecturer Award in the Faculty of Humanities and received a Special Performance Award from the Office of the Vice-Chancellor for high performance sustained over 3 consecutive years. In the same year, she was also nominated for the Department of Science and Technology's South African Women in Science Awards in the Distinguished Women category, a nomination that was repeated this year. Professor Lombard, we very much look forward to hearing your inaugural lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean, Registrar. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Time is one of the most precious commodities, and time is something that us archaeologists deal in, and we understand how precious it is. Your presence here this evening is really, really appreciated by me. The organizers only gave me 40 minutes, so I cannot welcome each and everyone by name, but please know that it's appreciated. With many of you in this room, I have walked a distance. Some of you for life, others for many years. For some of you, I've only started a journey, and I hope it will carry on. I do want to highlight 3 people tonight, however. And firstly, that is Professor Lynn Wadley, the lady there with the blue scarf. Lynn is my mentor. Lynn is an A-rated scientist, and Lynn was the first woman professor in archaeology in South Africa, if I have it correct. Lynn, you may seem petite to the people in this room tonight, but you are the giant on whose shoulders I am standing tonight. Know that. The other person is Dr. Isabelle Parsons, my respondent. I twisted her arm, and as per my reputation, I gave her a job for tonight. But Isabelle, you have walked the distance with me. Thank you for that, and thank you for being here. And once again allowing me to bully you into a job. I am really good at that. The other person is my sister, Antoinette de Bruin, who's here with her husband tonight. Antoinette, you and your family keeps me sane. In a world, as most of us in this room as academics will know, is not always sane. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your friendship. It's appreciated. So without much further ado, I'm going to take you back in time, because that's where I'm best comfortable in. And I'm going to take you back to about a century ago. In 1924, quarrymen found a fossil near Taung, in what is now the Northwest Province. A year later, Raymond Dart, an Australian anatomist and anthropologist who was the head of anthropology at Wits at the time, described the fossil, now known as the Taung child, in Nature as a new hominin species, Australopithecus africanus. For the first time, South Africa revealed its potential as a possible key locality for studying human origins. And this was based on the remains of a young child who lived here more than 2 million years ago and who became the type specimen of the species. And when we talk about type specimens, that means based on that fossil's physical description, all belonging to that species is based. Its discovery started a remarkable trend during which the all too often people, the children and the women of Southern Africa, would change what we know about human ancestry globally. The place of the town child in human evolutionary research did not come without resistance. At first, European scientists argued that the fossil represented an extinct chimpanzee or gorilla species, not a hominin. Until the 1940s, evolutionists thought that our human roots lay in Asia, certainly not in Africa. But once the African hominin fossil record became so convincing that it could no longer be brushed aside, some suggested a multi-regional model for our origins, still holding on to the old Eurasian ideal that humans could not have evolved in Africa. On the other end of the scale, creationists also opposed and even threatened Dart for what his interpretation of the fossil represented. But Robert Broom, a Scottish medical doctor working in South Africa at the time, saw the fossil just a week after its publication. And he was quite convinced that it was indeed a hominin. His interest piqued. He later dropped his occupation as physician and actually became a paleontologist at the South African Museum in Cape Town. And then he started working in what is now known as the cradle of humankind on the Gauteng Highveld, where he found among several other hominin fossils the very famous Mrs. Ples. And she is the adult specimen of the Taung child, Australopithecus africanus. And that discovery was made in 1947. Now, there has been some controversy about whether she's male or female, but for tonight, she's female. Recent work continues to highlight children and women in hominin research. For example, Australopithecus sediba, discovered in 2008 at the Malapa fossil site in the cradle by Professor Lee Berger, an American-born paleoanthropologist working from Wits, was described from the remains of a 13-year-old male nicknamed Karabo. And he roamed, or she, I'm not sure whether we know, it's a he. I have my in-house paleoanthropologist, roamed the Highveld at about 2 million years ago. It was actually Lee's then 9-year-old son, Matthew, who found the first clue that hominins might be at the site in the form of a clavicle or a collarbone, still embedded in the breccia. And, okay, Stephanie wants to quit here, but the breccia is that rock matrix that we find fossils in. While he was exploring the area with his dad. At that time, I just started a contract position at the then Institute for Human Evolution at Wits. And I quite remember vividly discussing the fossil and the potential of the site with Lee Berger and the late Professor Tobias. I apologize for the quality of the photo, but it was a nostalgic journey for me, and I needed to bring in Professor Tobias tonight. In a soon-to-come paper, pending peer review, the skull of yet another young child is destined to change what we thought we knew about the time depth of hominins in southern Africa. This time, the find comes from Driemolen. This is a cradle site managed by Stephanie Edwards-Baker, this young lady next to me, a young South African researcher based here at UJ. She works with an energetic team of international experts, and they have just completed their most exciting and most rewarding field season ever. So I think there'll be many things to come from there. But although hominin remains are very interesting, and I know the Dean is fascinated with them, and they are important for reconstructing the fossil matrix, they are very scarce. They are often also found very fragmented and in small little pieces. And fossils can only reveal the physical traits of humans or hominins. Our evolutionary history, however, is multifaceted, and to gain a holistic impression, information from other disciplines is critical. Since the 1980s, advances in human genetics started to shift paradigms in human origins research. Studies on mitochondrial DNA revealed that the Khoisan of southern Africa are the most deeply rooted living population worldwide. We inherit mitochondrial DNA directly in an unbroken line only from our mothers, our grandmothers, and our great-great-grandmothers. So that all living humans share a female ancestor. And she is often called in the media mitochondrial Eve. This hypothetical woman lived somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa between about 160 and 200,000 years ago. Genetically, she most closely resembled a San woman from southern Africa today. South African women, such as Professor Himla Sodjal, who received the Order of Mapungubwe for her outstanding contributions in the field of science, and her mentee, Karina Slebush, who now works from Uppsala University at her own laboratory in Sweden, are leaders in this field and continue to produce remarkable results about African population histories. With our collaborative research, we are overwriting outdated colonialist interpretations of the African past with the DNA of living and ancient peoples of the region itself. Now, at this point, you may wonder, and rightly so, where Stone Age archaeology fits into the narrative of our origins. Now, you may argue with me, but I think one of the most interesting questions one can ask is what makes us human? And with that I mean specifically Homo sapiens, modern human. That is us, you and me in this room this evening. And how, where, and when did we gain our humanness? Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish physician and naturalist, known also as the father of modern taxonomy, and taxonomy is the classification of ordering of organisms by scientists, introduced the name Homo sapiens, the wise human, in 1758. A couple of centuries later, William Stern, a botanist from Cambridge, nominated him as the type specimen of our species. And if you remember correctly, a type specimen is what all of us should be like if we are Homo sapiens. The deconstruction of this suggestion in the context of patriarchal racialism and feminist debates aside, and there are many, and you are welcome to read up on them, I found it interesting that to his contemporaries, naturalists, philosophers, and poets alike, Linnaeus was one of the most influential minds of their time. And a quote about him is that he was a poet who happened to become a naturalist. It is then to the human mind, a mind that is capable of wisdom and reason, and a mind that is flexible enough to think simultaneously both scientifically and creatively, that I find myself drawn to explore the origins of our humanness. As archaeologists, we excavate stuff, old stones, bones, pieces of shell. So how are we able to study the minds of people who lived thousands of years ago? The artifacts we excavate are human-made material culture, the tangible products and extensions of the human mind. resulting from generations of shared skills, knowledge, and ideas. In southern Africa, we find stone tools more than 2 million years old, with Homo habilis, the handy human, initially thought of as the first tool-making hominin. Thus, from the very beginning of our genus, we were linked inextricably to the material culture we produce and use. And all you need to do is think of a teenager and their addiction to their cell phones. And then you need to take it a step further and think about how much information you can gain about them if you had insight in the contents of those cell phones. Once it was acknowledged that humans evolved physically and genetically in Africa, accepted wisdom still dictated that the modern mind developed in Europe less than 50,000 years ago. Since the 1990s, however, South African Stone Age archaeologists such as Hilary Deacon and Professor Sarah Wirtz, who's sitting right there tonight with us, have challenged this status quo. Developments in dating methods, some of which led by a young South African woman, Zenobia Jacobs, who now also has her own laboratory at Wollongong University in Australia, and new discoveries at South African Stone Age sites confirmed their foresight, forever changing what we know about human cognitive evolution. First, there were the engraved pieces of ochre and small shell beads found by Chris Hinchelwood and his team at Blombos Cave on the Cape Coast. Here, more than 75,000 years ago, people used tools to engrave cross-hatch patterns on pieces of red ochre and strung small perforated shells, arranging them according to shape and color, perhaps to wear as a necklace. These artifacts reflect a symbolic component in material culture, signaling well-developed theory of mind. And theory of mind is what all of us lecturers use on our students, and that is, I think I know what you think, and therefore I need to out-strategize you. And attentional flexibility, the ability to shift one's attention and intentions between immediate, small-scale, and long-term, large-scale consequences. These cognitive abilities have been associated with the expansion and increased interconnectedness of the temporal and parietal cortices of the human brain. With cognitive scientists from Aarhus University in Denmark, we are currently conducting a series of psychophysical experiments to test whether the engravings evolve through time to become more recognizable to the human eye and increasingly loaded with symbolic intent. Our preliminary findings suggest that very similar to improvements in functional technologies, such as the evolution of hunting technologies, for example, the Blombos engravings evolved adaptively towards their cognitive role as signs over several thousands of years. Today, a life without signs, such as simple but universally understood road signs, is inconceivable. And it is quite enticing to think that the people of Blombos, at the southernmost tip of Africa, were amongst the first to develop such a system. At Sibudu Cave in KwaZulu-Natal, Professor Lynn Wadley and her team, of which I've been privileged to be a member for quite some time, also found early evidence for a range of complex technologies. And tonight is too short to mention it all. So just one example is the use of multi-component adhesives to glue stone spear tips into wooden shafts more than 70,000 years ago, very much like the tip that I hold in my hand here. This is an example of a very old indigenous knowledge system in which separate ingredients were mixed according to intricate recipes and heated to make new substances, seen today, for example, in synthetic materials such as plastics, paints, and even medicines. It attests to cognitive abilities such as thought experimentation, that's hypothesizing about outcomes, contingency planning, what to do if things go wrong, and planning across space and time, considering events that might be out of sight but not out of mind, in Lynn's own words. The ancient adhesives demonstrate that by 70,000 years ago, South African hunter-gatherers had the same fluid intelligence as we do today. The bow and arrow has been referred to as the first machine to change the world. And bow hunting was always thought to have been invented in Europe only 20,000 years ago. If my interpretation and the work of others are correct, however, on stone tools such as what you see there from Sibiru Cave is correct, then small quartz pieces were glued into arrow shafts more than 60,000 years ago. Neanderthals in Eurasia and Homo heidelbergensis in Africa used spears from about 400 to 300,000 years ago. But bow hunting is, as far as we know, unique to us, to Homo sapiens. So that it might highlight how our cognition and even our brains evolved differently from other human populations. In a first study of its kind, we used EEG scanning here at UJ to test whether shooting an arrow is more taxing cognitively than throwing a spear. Our results indicated that shooting arrows required statistically significantly higher levels of neural activity compared to spear throwing. We also demonstrated that participants mentally rehearsed the shooting of an arrow, but they didn't do so when throwing a spear. This is the first direct neuroarchaeological evidence for something called praxis, and that is the human ability, based on ideas or imaginings, to knowingly play out different scenarios in our minds before enacting them. Such conscious imagination and ideation are quintessential traits of our humanness. There can be no science, there can be no art, and indeed, there can be no fourth industrial revolution without them. Please tell the Vice Chancellor. That way of thinking enables us to examine our own thoughts. It requires fully developed episodic memory or autonoetic awareness. That is the ability to mentally place ourselves in imagined past, present, or future. And most importantly, to know that it is not real. Our capacity to do this have evolved relatively recently, perhaps less than 100,000 years ago, and seems to be unique to the human mind. Its neurological foundations are found in the precuneus, and only Homo sapiens displays a general enlargement of the complete parietal surface, including the precuneus. What is more, 2 independent sports science fMRI studies confirmed the association of autonoetic awareness and the precuneus with modern-day archery. Thus, I would like to argue that ancient activities, such as bow hunting, was probably instrumental in shaping the modern human brain, right here in Africa. A brain with which Africans colonized the globe, after about 80,000 years ago, outwitting and outlasting all other human groups, with only small amounts of non-African archaic human DNA remaining in our gene pool. Since the 1700s, philosophers have considered our abilities to gain causal knowledge and to reason about outcomes based on it key to the human way of thinking. Both humans and animals use basic associations to learn about causal relations. That is, to learn what connects one process, the cause, with another process or state, the effect. Non-human tool-using primates have a very limited or basic understanding of how a tool affects the object it is used on. But they do not fully grasp the underlying relationships or the physical principles of tool use, so that usually tool behavior is limited to one outcome only. For example, chimpanzee groups that use hammer stones to crack nuts do not grasp that they can use the same implement or principle for other tasks too. Humans, on the other hand, demonstrate a much more profound understanding of causal relations and a capacity for predicting causal interventions, which generally cannot be reduced to simple associative learning. It requires abstraction, dealing with ideas rather than with things or events. In my work with Peter Jardenfors, a distinguished professor of philosophy and cognitive science at Lund University in Sweden, we are exploring the evolution of human causal cognition since our split from the chimpanzees about 6 million years ago. Our analysis of force dynamics as a central element in causal cognition, and that is the way we understand how entities interact with each other as a result of applied force, demonstrates that there is an interplay between the extension of the human body through technology, expanding our cognitive abilities to reason about causes. Also here, bow hunting serves as an example of the most complex grade of causal reasoning, a term that I have come to use as causal network understanding. With such understanding, I am able to abstract, that is, to intellectualize or to conceptualize the knowledge gained from one domain, let's say the physics of using the latent energy in a bow to shoot an arrow, and apply it to a completely different domain, such as making music on a bow. This is accomplished by remembering and imagining how past scenarios, such as the sound of the bowstring made when an arrow was shot, can be used innovatively or creatively in the future in a new or different setting that is completely unrelated to hunting. It entails abstract understanding of how domain-specific causal node sets connect or link to interdomain causal networks. The most advanced form of this kind of reasoning is science, or hypothetical reasoning. Not far from the earliest known bow hunters that lived at Sibudu Cave more than 60,000 years ago, a young hunter-gatherer boy of about 6 or 7 years old was buried on the beach at Ballito Bay. Published in Science last year, this is the most recent example of a South African child to change human global history. We sampled his DNA, and the team at Uppsala Laboratory in Sweden was able to reconstruct his full genome. His family was ancestral to the Khoisan and lived in KwaZulu-Natal about 2,000 years ago. And that was before the influx of herders from East Africa or farmers from West Africa. And this enabled us to use his DNA to recalculate the genetic time depth for the origins of our species to between 350 and 260,000 years ago, much older than the previously estimated 200 to 160,000 years ago. Our work on older material continues with unknown outcomes. In forthcoming work with Rian Rifkin from the University of Pretoria, we also aim to publish the genetic traces of ancient pathogens, and that's the disease-causing microorganisms associated with the Bulito boy. This will be another first-of-its-kind study for Africa, creating previously unimaginably detailed personal knowledge about individuals who roamed our past landscapes. Preliminary results indicate that he was infected with a form of typhus, Rickettsia felis, and with malaria, a co-infection still fatal to many African children. A few decades ago, lines of research such as neuroarchaeology and reconstructing the full genomes of people who lived millennia before us were inconceivable. In 2013, we highlighted gene regions identified by the medical science as involved in current human cognitive and brain development, and which show strong evidence for selection in early Homo sapiens. It is my opinion tonight that the future of human origins research lies in cohesive interdisciplinary research programs aimed at understanding gene culture, brain culture, and gene-brain coevolution. Some of the examples I highlighted represent a new area in human origins research in Southern Africa as well globally. An era in which the University of Johannesburg aims to lead in a holistic approach to human origins research by establishing a new interfaculty Paleo Research Institute with a distinct Southern African identity and demography. Our task will be to integrate fully our fossil, archaeological, and genetic records with state-of-the-art methods and global trends and debates, whilst dedicating this knowledge thus gained to the youth and to their futures in a region that gave birth to our humanness. Thank you.
I'm reminded this evening of the opening words to an essay in Rebecca Solnit's The Far Away Nearby. She writes, "What's your story? It's all in the telling. Stories are compasses in architecture. We navigate by them. We build our sanctuaries and our prisons out of them. And to be without a story is to be lost in the vastness of a world that spreads in all directions like Arctic tundra or sea ice." Solnit writes, of course, about all of us, about how we make sense of the world and of those around us. But she also writes about those singular individuals who draw on their riches of creative energy and imagination and innovation and of technical and observational skills to tell the very best stories. It strikes me that we've just heard such a story. Professor Marlize Lombard has told us a story about the human past going back more than 2 million years. A story about archaeology in South Africa and a story about future promise. Her account is breathtaking in scope and rich in detail, touching upon great discoveries searching questions, pioneering methods, big personalities. It tells about the very first discovery of early hominin remains at the southern point of Africa, and about similarly exciting paleoanthropological finds in the century that's followed. It tells us about genetic evidence that suggests a sub-Saharan African mother for all living human beings today, and about genetic evidence indicating that our species first developed rather earlier than previously thought. About the material culture, the stuff, created by our ancestors, and today providing a window into their often unexpectedly sophisticated minds. About the microscopic traces on artifacts that tell us how they were used, and about their users. And about neuroarchaeological evidence generated by carefully controlled replication studies. We've been reminded of researchers past and present who contributed seminal chapters to this unfolding history of humankind in southern Africa. And we've been made to recall, at just the right moment, that the prehistoric record represents women and children, as well as men, and of the remarkable extent to which the remains of the historically marginalized have advanced our understanding of the human deep past. There's a poetic symmetry to this truth being emphasized by a woman with an unfailing awareness of emerging research concerns, the courage to incorporate novel methodologies into her own projects, and the influence to make others follow suit. A woman whose archaeological career is punctuated by ingenious collaborations and innovative approaches. A woman who consistently prioritizes the relevance and accessibility of her research findings to as wide an audience as possible. How does the story end? The short answer is that it doesn't. This decade's technologies will be enhanced or replaced by those of the next, leading to new ways of questioning the same evidence and to new ways of questioning new evidence. We have, with characteristic clarity of vision, been encouraged this evening to adopt an integrated, interdisciplinary approach to South Africa's fossil, archaeological, and genetic records, and to ensure that our findings inform global research trends and discourses, actions that in themselves will ensure the continuation of the tale. In her rumination over storytelling, Solnit also states that to love someone is to figure out how to tell yourself their story. Professor Lombard has done exactly that. One salient feature of her substantial body of work is the people at the heart of it. And it's their inclusion that transfigures her science into a story about the human past that, as we've seen this evening, captivates its audience. It has been my privilege for many years to know and work with Marlize, who is devoted to uncovering the lives of our ancestors and who tells their story with expertise and with much love. It's my privilege to be a member of this occasion's select audience and to respond to this inaugural lecture. It's with anticipation and with confidence that we await the many stories still to be told by Professor Lombard and by the numerous scholars that she continues to inspire and nurture. Stories that tell us as humans and as prehistorians who we were and who we are today and who we might still become. Stories by which we can navigate the present as well as the future. Thank you.
Sure, ladies and gentlemen, I think you will agree with me that this has been a fascinating story. Thank you so much, Dr. Parsons, for summarizing, the impact of this story on the science, on the students, I think on new knowledge. So thank you very much for that. And then, Professor Lombard, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. As Dr. Parsons indicated, it took us back, but you linked it so nicely with our future, and particularly here at UJ, where we are engaging now with these debates on the fourth industrial revolution. And as you pointed out, there can't be a fourth industrial revolution if we don't understand our humanness. And I think your story should be shared with the wider university community. I know that we are also recording it, but I think the task teams working on the fourth industrial revolution must hear this story, really. So thank you and congratulations so much with what you have achieved and the impact that you bring to the sciences, and also I think for going forward, the many projects still awaiting. All the very best. We wish you just the very best with your career. So ladies and gentlemen, join me again in congratulating Professor Lombard. It's one of those talks that you can just, it's so fascinating. You just want to keep on listening. So thank you very much. Also the way you presented it to us. So now it's time for the robing and some photographs, and then we're gonna ask you just to stand after we've congratulated Prof. Lombard here in front of the podium, and then we will ask you to join us for refreshments next door. Thank you.